The horse is a staple of many an action-adventure game. Whether you're cantering through historic streets in Assassin's Creed, hunting your prey in The Witcher, or drinking in the Hyrule Plains in The Legend of Zelda, your noble steed will help you make your way across vast open landscapes, traversing terrain in a fraction of the time that you would while on foot. But while they've become something of a commodity, building a good video game horse is incredibly difficult. Horses are not cars. I mean, I think that should be obvious, but they also don't move like regular vehicles. It's not just forward motion and steering. Their footwork and lateral movement have a huge impact on how horses traverse a variety of conditions. But more critically, horses are living creatures, and even video game horses should move and behave in realistic ways. As players, we strive not just for a video game horse that is fast and responsive, but feels like a character in and of itself. I'm Tommy Thompson, this is AI in Games, and for this episode I've spent far too long staring at horse testicles, so you don't have to. Actually, why aren't the horses gelded? Like, that's a thing dating back, only 2,000 years.
Hashtag equestrian facts, yo.
That's right, we're taking a look at the horses in Red Dead Redemption 2, and the efforts made by developers Rockstar to make these creatures feel realistic, ensuring they react to the world around them, the terrain they're riding across, and the perils they face, such as obstacles, cliff tops, and even those idiot humans trying to ride them directly into trees. In Red Dead Redemption 2, players assumed the role of Arthur Morgan, a member of the Vanderlinde gang who are ramping up for one last heist before setting off into the sunset. Players can explore the highs and lows of approximately 29 square miles of the Old West, and as such, your horse is critical to helping you navigate and survive the harsh terrain. There are 19 breeds of horse in Red Dead Redemption 2, all of which have unique characteristics and different personalities. This means that the programmers, artists and animators involved had a big task ahead of them in building realistic companions for the player to ride. Not just in how they move around the world, but how they react to terrain, as well as a lot of little behavioural quirks that add that attention to detail fans of Rockstar have come to expect. As detailed in a 2021 GDC talk by lead AI and gameplay programmer Tobias Kleanthous, the goal for Red Dead Redemption 2 was for players to build emotional attachments to their horses. The functionality combined with bespoke behavioural tweaks would make them stand out as the true supporting roles of the game. Now, this isn't to say that the horses built in the original Red Dead Redemption weren't great, but the development team reviewed a lot of that original functionality, plus their first pass at updating it for Red Dead 2, and then realised it wasn't going to suit their needs. The horses actually had fairly limited and stiff movement. Their movement speeds were quite rigid, and often the animations didn't quite line up as desired. Horses felt more like cars with legs, in much the same way that they feel in other games, and that wasn't going to be enough for Red Dead 2. They needed to be more flexible to changes in the world and have a greater freedom of movement. This is evident right from the start of the game, given there are many sequences in the opening chapter with the Vanderlinde gang riding together. Without this more flexible system, this would become a chaotic mess and deny the cinematic vibe that Rockstar sought to attain. So this led to a huge revamp aimed at injecting believability in the horses, with the team focusing on 3 core areas. First up, a new locomotion system that allowed the horse to move at different speeds, but also synchronised with the animation system such that they looked as realistic as possible. A system for understanding the local terrain that not only taps into the animation system to adjust it, but can also influence the horse's actual behaviour. And lastly, a personality layer that adds a lot more nuance and behavioural traits so that your horse behaves more like its real-world equivalent. This is not a small task by any stretch, with the work on horse AI and controls handled both by a team at Rockstar India, based in Bangalore, as well as the game's primary studio, Rockstar North, in Edinburgh, Scotland. To get started, the dev team sought inspiration by observing real horses in the hands of professional riders, and this led to the first fundamental change to the horse behaviour, the introduction of lateral movement. Lateral movement, or, an object moving side to side, is not something we see in video game animals. They're typically objects with a fixed forward motion and an ability to steer, with the turning angle becoming tighter the slower the animal is moving. But when standing still, a lot of video game horses simply rotate on the spot. To make it realistic, you have to add a lot more nuance. Horses often strafe when turning, getting more purchase on the ground and then allowing them to turn quickly. Plus, when a horse turns on the spot, it doesn't pivot from the centre of the body, but rather the root of the rotation is actually aligned with their front feet. So adding this lateral movement is just fine from an AI and gameplay perspective, but it adds a new problem for animators, given it's adding a new dimension of movement which complicates the animation systems you need to make it look realistic. Typically, an animation team will dictate which animations a character in a game can transition into, and then the exact points where the two meet, using what is known as a blend tree. The blend tree can then say, based on some input information such as the speed of the character and their direction, what weight each of the possible animations have in the blend. So if you're looking at the speed of a character, you can tell whether that character should walk or run, or if it's in that middle ground where the character should be transitioning from walk to run. The weights dictate how much each animation is being used in the character model. Blend trees work great for small sets of animations or with animations that easily align with one another. But of course this gets incredibly difficult the more realistic you want the movement to be and the range of freedom the character has, and of course if the number of unique animations increases. That's because developers need to sit down and manually figure out where those animations should blend and what the rules are for making it happen. So what's the issue here? Why is adding lateral movement such a big deal? Well, previously the horses only had two key considerations, the movement speed and the turning angle. That's already a huge problem, given you're dealing with a four-legged animal. If we consider the movement speed, or rather the linear velocity of a horse, the gait or movement pattern of the legs changes accordingly. Typically a horse will move with one of four key gaits: walk, trot, canter and gallop. In each case you can see the physical exertion of the horse based on that gait, and while the speed may be within some definable range, it shouldn't be fixed. On top of all of this, when you watch them move, you'll notice the intervals between their front and rear hooves hitting the ground are irregular. You didn't expect to learn so much about horses in this episode, did you? Welcome to AI and Horses, or is it Horses and Games? Either way, like and subscribe. Bringing this all to a point, you already have an animation system that has to figure out how to blend different animations for the linear velocity, then you add in the angular velocity, aka the speed with which you're steering the horse, and already that is a complex mesh of two dimensions being plotted in an animation space, within which you need to figure out where the blend points are for the animations. Now, adding in lateral velocity, which is the rate of strafing movement, you now have a third dimension, making it even harder to figure out the correct blend points. Rockstar originally implemented the system as before, but it wasn't working, and more critically, getting the animation team to figure out those exact blend points was going to be a huge challenge, so the trick was to figure out how to automate it. Now, it's becoming more common for programmers to try and automate animation blends, and sometimes even with a little bit of AI help. We saw this back in episode 30 looking at the modern Doom games, with a bespoke system for calculating how to adapt animations at runtime, as well as episode 45's deep dive on Hitman, in which we looked at how IO Interactive have been using reinforcement learning to solve animation blends since Hitman Absolution. Rockstar's solution is a highly complicated animation framework that allows the horse to speed up, slow down, turn, and all the animations adapt automatically. The trick to this is a system for capturing the movement features of each animation. It could figure out how a horse is moving in that three-dimensional space, plus where its legs are currently placed, and then based upon that, figure out what is the correct animations the horse should be using based on the three velocity values. The system would analyse each animation and record the acceptable rates of linear, angular and lateral velocities that it reflects and what are the acceptable movement speeds for that animation. So for example, a given gait would have a minimum, ideal and maximum movement speed, meaning that the animation isn't linked to a fixed speed of the horse, but rather it reflects the exertion the horse must be making in order to hit that speed. With this analysis complete, at any point in time the animation system could observe the correct speed values of the horse, identify which animations are relevant, and what blend weights to use between them. This was a huge effort, but it yields two very important benefits. First of all, it meant that the developers could continue to add new animations, and the system could automatically figure out the key features and how it can then be used in the blends. But also, it meant that the system could produce results better than humans could, or at least as good as what a human could achieve, in significantly less time than if they did it manually. By introducing the lateral velocity, it actually allowed the horses to, well, as Rockstar call it, drift. It meant the horses more loosely turned, which had the added benefit of making them look more realistic, as well as conveying the notion that the player isn't directly controlling the horse, but rather you're telling it where you want to go and the horse is responding in kind. You know, because it's a good horse. But that isn't enough to sell the experience, given the transitions between the gates was still a problem. As I mentioned already, the acceptable movement speeds of a given gate helped with the believability, but transitioning between gate animations requires a gradual transition that isn't guaranteed to be fixed. Plus, critically, it has to synchronize with the feet, so the horse's animation transitions aren't fixed. Instead, it uses continuous acceleration and deceleration cycles that observe the change in speed within a fixed window and whether the animation should shift at that time. This is used not just for a horse speeding up, but also for slowing down and coming to a stop. The game actually has a custom deceleration cycle for a horse moving towards stop that is designed largely to stop the horse feeling completely unresponsive and playing a fixed animation as they move to a halt, given the player could at the last second change their mind. But it also adds enough wriggle room to remind the player that they are not in complete control of the horse's behaviour, which is kinda cool. So with this incredibly complicated animation system in place, there was another problem to add on top of this: responding to the terrain. Terrain has a number of influences on the horse. First of all, there's a need for it to respond to local geography. Is it going to dodge a nearby obstacle that the player is still steering it towards, or completely ignore the player's inputs given you're barreling towards a tree or a cliff top? It's worth remembering that the horse is still an AI character. It feeds off of the inputs of the player, but it will ignore you if it feels its self-preservation is under threat. But on top of all this, it's still an animation problem, because if a horse is riding up an incline, down a ravine, or into water or snow, it needs to react and change its animations accordingly. Typically, to do this, you rely on IK, or inverse kinematics, in technical animation. What IK does in a nutshell is it allows for moving parts of an animated character to calculate the appropriate positions of limbs with respect to external forces, both in a way that is realistic by recognizing the underlying skeleton and joints, but also still respecting the original animation. So if you have a character that is walking along uneven ground, it uses the same animation it would use if it was on flat land, but the feet and legs are placed on the ground in a way that looks more realistic. The problem is that while this sorts out the feet, when you line it up with the body and head of a horse as it's climbing up a hill, it doesn't look right. So instead, Rockstar's solution was to add specific animations that handle inclines and declines, and then add another dimension to the animation system that assessed the pitch of the horse. But rather than having them all lumped together as one big mass of animations in 4D space, this time around they used a clustering technique to group all animations that are inclining, others that were declining, and those on flat terrain. Then, based on the current pitch of the horse, it would grab the animations from one or more clusters and then blend them together appropriately. This clustering process was then extended even further, with each of those three groups being extended to allow for horses that lead with their left or right foot, meaning that now, instead of 3 separate 3D blend spaces, there was now 6, handling 3 velocities, the pitch of the horse, and which foot it was leading with. Meaning, now they could blend animations for speed, turning, pitch, and even a lead change, which is when a horse changes its leading foot. Now of course, in order for the horse to know what pitch it was going to need, there's a separate system that looks at the local geometry, the path that the horse is currently moving along, and double checks against the navigation mesh to validate the surface angles that it's about to traverse. In addition, there is also a mechanism to detect what are known as deep surfaces, such as water, snow and mud, and even things like the local wind strength is measured and stored at runtime. So the horses have all of these animations and the variety of different speeds, running gates in the local geography. There's still a need for it to figure out what actions and animations it runs and in what sequence. The horses have a locomotion system that break up every possible individual action it can make into what are known as motions. This can mean an action on its entire body, such as a canter or gallop, an action on a separate part of the body, such as the head or tail, using what's known as a layered animation, and even the horse rider themselves. Based on the current in-game conditions, the system calculates which motion actions it's going to use, then selects all the animations accordingly. It's a massive data-driven framework that handles everything from a horse stomping through snow, and the horse reacting differently depending on the depth of the snow, to the rider reacting to turning into the wind, and even the subtle details of the horse's tail reacting to what the rest of its body is doing. The number of unique motions is actually kind of ridiculous. Around 6,300 of them are in the game, though as I mentioned earlier in the video, the developers had sought to rework their locomotion system. So while there are over 6,000 motions, the same system is also being used for other animals and even the human characters as well. But getting back to the obstacle avoidance problem, how does the horse try to avoid obstacles even when you're telling it otherwise? The game pays attention to how you're riding and the local geometry you're heading towards, and calculates whether or not the proposed locomotion path that the horse is heading along is going to collide with something. If a horse detects it's going to hit something, then the newly added lateral motion is used to have the horse strafe slightly to a safer path, but is done so as smoothly and as quickly as possible, so it then stops interfering and the horse becomes responsive once again to your inputs. The problem is, this actually worked a little too well, to a point that the team were asked to tone it down, such that the player could still, if they want, have the horse barrel straight into a tree and they can actually hit it. Because a cowboy simulator isn't truly complete until you can deliberately smash yourself face first into a nice bit of bark. But there is one main override here, having the horse stop on the edge of a cliff. Apparently it's okay to plough face first into a tree, but driving your noble steed to its doom was too far even for the GTA people. Cliff stopping actually works on multiple layers. The locomotion system will detect the horse is heading for a cliff. In order to ensure this always happens, the level designers had to go in and tag all the cliff edges with metadata that denotes it's a cliff. Once the horse detects it, it runs a speed penalty system that calculates the distance, the speed it needs to slow down from, and the upcoming beat cycle of the horse's feet to figure out the appropriate animations needed before using a halting animation like you see here. Now, this isn't to say it's impossible to drive a horse off a cliff, as I'm waiting for y'all to go rushing down to the comments like, well, actually, but it does make it a heck of a lot harder to pull off. And besides, if you do like to drive your horse off a cliff, what it really means is that you're a terrible person and do not deserve the love and respect of your peers. Now, while this episode has largely been about the animations of each horse and how Rockstar sells the realism, it's important that the player feels like these AI characters are real animals. As a result, there's a lot of extra little tweaks made to the horse's behaviour. This either manifests solely in the animations or it influences the control, to reinforce that while you're in the saddle, the horse is driving you where it wants to go. One small thing to talk about is how the game makes it look like the rider is actually riding the horse realistically. Given the huge range of animations available for the horses, there are a whole bunch of separate human animations for horse riding, with a separate team dedicated towards crafting them. But now you got to sync those two things up, and the trick to making this work is what are known as sync points. Each horse animation has metadata in it that points out the rhythm of the horse's movement, paying close attention to the feet falling and the high and low points of the body in context of the gait. There are then separate rhythm tags synced to the rider as well. The game then synchronises these so the rider will bob up and down on the horse's back in a way that looks realistic. As we discovered already with the obstacles, one of the easiest ways to make the horses have some personality is to respond more to the world around them. When the horse responds, it might ignore or push back against the player's inputs. This is of course a tough balancing act, given you want the horse to still respond to the player the bulk of the time, but in situations where it makes sense for the horse to deviate, then it should do so. The developers introduced the notion of motivation, whereby the horse would react negatively based on what's happening in the world. This could be because you're caught in a heated gunfight, because they're being chased by a bear, or you're being a wee shit and treating your horse badly. This motivation system is actually a type of utility AI, as detailed in a recent episode of my AI 101 series that scores specific things that influence its behaviour. First up, there is an agitation motivation, which shows the horse responding to external elements. If these become strong enough, and therefore the horse is quite agitated, it adds conditions to the motion system so the horse changes animation, but it also changes their responsiveness to the player's controls. In fact, the player mechanic to calm your horse by patting it isn't just an animation designed to make you feel good. The horse will actually calm down as it causes those utility values to decrease. Well, provided you're not trying to, calm it down while you're standing 6 feet away from a bear. But agitation isn't the only motivation. The same system is used to denote when a horse is tired or hurt, meaning it again will influence the motion types it can animate from and also interfere with the controls. It adds a sense of realism and personality. And it also means you better take care of your horse, you son of a. But when all is said and done, my favourite AI motivation, and the dumbest fact in this video, is the poop motivation. That's right kids, the horses in Red Dead 2 don't just pop a cheeky shit based on some random timer. The horses actually have a motivation meter for poop that slowly increases, and once it hits that all-important moment, it decides to drop a load. So, if there's one thing to take away from this episode, don't make a poop joke, don't make a poop joke, don't make a poop joke, is that building realistic animals, or more specifically realistic animals you can ride in video games, requires a tremendous amount of detail and attention. Rockstar themselves admitted that they were skeptical of taking such a heavily automated approach for the horse's animation, but the final results, and the feedback from fans, suggest that this has paid dividends. The work detailed here is incredibly complicated, and shows a real dedication towards just one small part of a much larger game. It's really quite something, and gives us a taste of the level of detail put into Rockstar's work. So there we have it folks, after over 60 episodes of AI in games we've scored 2 off the bucket list. An episode on a game by Rockstar, something many of you have asked for, and an episode on horses. To be honest, that wasn't on my bucket list, but horses are pretty awesome, so everybody wins. But you know who doesn't win? People that don't subscribe to AI in games. Jesus Tommy, that was an awful segue. Look, if you subscribe, it helps me out. It puts this wonderful horse AI video into the eyeballs of more people. I mean, who doesn't love horses? And AI horses? Once shoved, those eyeballs will shed tears of joy, and their ears will be aroused by my dulcet Scottish tones. Plus, of course, you can support this channel on Patreon, like all of these people. If enough of you supported, we could have gave away a horse in a competition for this episode. But there isn't, so I didn't. If you want a free horse, support the Patreon, damn it! I love you all, see you on the next video.